continue your journey using sustainable transport. But your comment about policies, there are a lot of policies which I think would help that modal shift. We're still only a small percentage of journeys are made on public transport versus the car. And to be fair, that will take political leadership, and they would be schemes like putting in zero emission zones in our urban areas, for example, looking at congestion charging, and also looking at the pricing of road transport, be it public transport or be it the car, for example, and lots of regions, across the UK, across Europe, across Ireland are looking at those types of schemes. But those schemes will take political leadership, but they also will have to be matched with investment in public transport. Because if we're going to encourage people to modal shift, there needs to be the public transport there to allow them to do it.
And finally, Chair, I have to ask this because I know there was money received to do a feasibility study in the Armagh or the Downlink and the reinstatement. Yeah. And a lot of people, there's if we're talking about connecting, there's an opportunity there. Would you like to comment on that, please?
Well, we've started the feasibility work. It came up as part of actually the Union Connectivity project, and we've started the feasibility work for the Portadown to Armagh rail extension. We'd hope to have that complete by the end of this year, and then from that, we'll be able to determine what the next steps are.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope it's a positive outcome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Keith.
Funding.
Keith.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, Graham, thanks for coming along. I'm looking at the pie chart, your little pie chart you provided there. So if I was looking at that pie chart in England, Scotland or Wales, what would that pie chart look like in comparison? I know you touched on we're not giving as much money, so what would that pie chart look like? And second part to that question then, obviously we're looking at fares revenue and that. What is fares like in comparison in other nations in the UK in comparison to here? And is public transport attractive here or more attractive there?
So, can answer two sections to that. First of all, I would say that if you compared that pie chart with Scotland, England outside of London and Wales, you would see the fares revenue would be about 40% of the pie, and the public service obligation would be about 60%. And that's because there's a bigger investment, and it's not because the pie is smaller, it's because the pie is bigger, but the proportion of public service obligation funding is larger, which sort of references the funding and NI funding versus other regions in that chart, where you can see that funding in Northern Ireland has been well below the UK average for around a decade, and that's both resource funding and capital funding. So certainly the pie would be different. In terms of overall fares, I would say our bus fares are pretty comparable to the rest of the UK and the Republic of Ireland. Our rail fares are probably lower than you would typically see across the UK, and that's because we have a sort of policy, or the policy in Northern Ireland is to keep them pretty consistent. But certainly that means that our rail fares are a little bit lower. But having said that, that's not really the big driver. The big driver is the level of government funding that's coming into those areas versus what's coming into Northern Ireland.
So are you seeing people going to public transport more than you did, and what's driving that?
Well, we're encouraging. Since COVID, obviously we've grown back, and we are, seeing that growth post-COVID, and we hope to see that growth continue again past where we were pre-COVID. We're seeing probably pre-COVID, we were seeing about 1 million, 1.5 million growth in passengers a year, which is good. Most of that's through our marketing campaigns, through adopting schemes like Y-Link, which encourages young people to use public transport. That's not funded by government, that's just funded Translink ourselves. And looking at we have flexibility up to a small amount to flex routes where we see there's demand, and we can justify it. So we look at different demand areas and try to address that. But it's mostly where we can get additional demand through better marketing and through some fare promotions for specific categories of the population, like young people, for example.
Next question's on capital investment then. I see there you're talking about 1.5 billion over the next 4 years. So that's obviously what you would like and what you require, right? Or what you would like. Where does the percentage that come from? Even the stuff you are getting, the capital investment, what percentage you're getting from your own reserves and what you're getting from government? So give me a bit of a breakdown, you know.
Well, in terms of capital funding, it all comes from government. The majority of it comes from government. We do access other sources of funding. So, for example, when we were starting our zero emission bus project, we actually did source some initial capital funding from the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles. We have, for some of the feasibility work we're doing at the minute, we've sourced funding from Union Connectivity Review. One of the things I haven't mentioned yet is when we open Belfast Grand Central Station, we're planning to put in an hourly enterprise service between Belfast and Dublin. Some of the funding for that's coming from the Shared Island Fund from the Irish government. And we're also looking at bidding for funding through the SEUPB for a new fleet for Belfast to Dublin as well. So we do look for other sources of funding as well, but it's those types of areas, and then the Department for Infrastructure.
So out of the 1.5 that you require, what do you envisage getting over the next 4 years?
That's the $1 million question, I would say at this point, Keith. You've got the department coming in after this, and they'll maybe refer to the budgets and what capital funding is going to be available. Our first ask is for the 325 million we're looking for next year, and you know, we have projects lined up to deliver on that, but that will depend on the Minister's call and the department's call.
Last question from me, Chair. Rural community transport is obviously much needed in the rural community to, I suppose, to complement yours or you complement theirs. What's your working relationships like with rural community transport? You know that you're going down a road and 10 minutes later they're going down the same road. How do you work with them for the lack of, duplicating services in places that don't already get it, but then sometimes you've nothing and then sometimes you've two? Well,
we do work with community transport, and I think there's opportunity to work closer with them in lots of areas. I mentioned park and rides there, and I think part of the network design in the future should consider community transport bringing people to a park and ride, and then Translink, let's say, taking the rest of the journey. And I think that could be a better use of resources for both organisations. But that's something we'd like to continue to discuss with community transport. They provide a vital service there as well, and it's important that we continue to work together.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, gentlemen, for your presentation. And just want to put on record our appreciation to Graham as well for the regular briefings with the local elected reps. I think they are very valuable, usually held in some of our local bus and rail centres. And I think that the Translink figures even showing the number of journeys from the Bangor to Belfast train line that increased from 21-22, 320,000 and up to 540,000 in a year shows how valuable the rail connection is, certainly in my constituency. I know you've done a lot of work over the last number of years, maintenance works on the line and so on as well, and I think that's particularly welcome. Just a couple of issues. I know it's been touched upon already in terms of the concessionary fare scheme, and I think just to reiterate that point, how it is getting people on our public transport who wouldn't normally use it. How valuable do you feel the current service is, and do you feel that there's a way to make it maybe more effective, for you and for the people out there?
Well, I think the scheme works pretty well as it stands at the minute. I suppose obviously all of this is subject to funding, but I think the area where we could extend the concessionary fare scheme would be to young people. I think creating those behaviours when people are young and staying on public transport longer would be helpful. Typically what we do is we have young people on a half fare until they're 16, and then as soon as they're making that decision to go out and use a car, we up their fare to full fare. So we're immediately discouraging them off public transport and then heading them towards car use. If we were able to keep a concessionary fare scheme through till maybe people who were 23, for example, as other regions have done, then it might encourage young people to stay on public transport for longer, and maybe that behaviour change then would stay with them for a longer period of time. So that would be the main change I would say is encouraging young people to stay on it. And obviously there are some people with disabilities who have a particular concession as well. I think there's opportunities there to address some of the issues that there are in the current concessionary scheme with those people.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. I think they're valid points, certainly. Just another issue I noticed within your documents was around Translink recruitment and retention, and I appreciate that's linked as well with the ongoing pay issues, no doubt as well having a factor on that. But I suppose, what steps are you taking to address those issues? And I know the department are facing similar challenges, you know, across the department at every level, both technical roles as well. So what steps are you taking to address those issues, just retention and recruitment within Translink?
Well, look, we've a recruitment plan to address bus drivers, for example, train drivers, all of our frontline staff, and that takes place on an ongoing basis. You'll see some will use their own buses to advertise that recruitment as well, and that's an ongoing activity. And we're able to bring in, we had a really big challenge just after COVID when a lot of drivers, for example, were going to other driving roles basically, and that started to calm down a little bit now, and we're starting to balance the market a wee bit in terms of recruitment in that area. There are some very specific technical roles which are hard to get in the market generally, and we work with recruitment companies to help us address those, but also we work then with where we can with other agencies. If we can't get the resource, we'll work with someone else to try and help us do that particular activity. So at the minute it's starting to balance out a wee bit, and we're seeing some positive signs that the market's balancing a wee bit in terms of recruitment and retention.
Good. No, I'm glad to hear that, and hopefully, progress will be made on the ongoing negotiations as well. I know the Chair touched upon it. Just final question, Chair. Just around the George Best Belfast City Airport, the rail connection there. Obviously, it's a very important link, but there's been a feeling for years that the current Sydenham stop is, I suppose, under par. It isn't the ideal situation. I think it was really located for the old entrance, back 15 years ago and maybe more. Is there any plans, I know it's been talked about for years, but improving accessibility? We've all seen it when you're driving the Sydenham bypass, people carrying large luggage, half a mile down a 4-lane carriageway in the rain. Is there plans of, obviously there'll be a huge cost to putting in an additional stop or changing that stop, but where are we with that? Is it on the agenda with Translink?
It is on the agenda, and I don't want to go off tangent a wee bit, but it is one of the issues we have with planning and all of that when we talk about local area plans and access to public transport, but a lot of the plans and things that are being built now are built without any consideration to public transport, and the plans were issued maybe a number of years ago, and Belfast City Airport's a good example of that. As you say, the airport was moved, there's planning for that, there's no consideration as to what was going to happen to public transport, so we're now left in this situation about how do we address it. We have met Belfast City Airport senior management team and their managing director, and we've discussed options, and we're going through some feasibility work with the airport as to how we would address that. But there would have to be, obviously there'd be a private airport owner benefiting from that, so there'll have to be some matching of funding between the private sector and the public sector to address that. But yes, we're definitely we're doing a feasibility work at the minute to see what the different options would be for that and what the costings would be.
Good. And would it be an additional stop, do you think, or would it be a replacement for the Sydenham stop?
We still haven't finalised on the finalised options. You could extend the existing stop and provide a crossing closer to the airport, or there are options which we put in an additional stop as well, but that puts two stops very close together, so we have to manage all of that too.
No, that's good to
hear. The options are still being worked through.
Good. No, that's good to hear, and hopefully it'll be kept high on the agenda. Yeah. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chris, for your presentation, and Graham, good to put a face to all of the emails we've been getting. Always very useful, helpful to hear what's going on. Two questions. One just on the future ticketing update, just to see how that is progressing, but also specifically, I'd like to know why the ferries have not been included in that service, particularly in Strangford ferry, my own constituency, but I think Rathvillan as well. There may be operational reasons for that, but I'd just like to find out what those are. It's been a cash service for far too long in most parts of the country, and particularly in rural areas where banks are closing and ATMs are not easily accessible. That is a barrier to accessing public transport a lot of the time, not having that cash available. So that future ticketing service, I think, is going to be a major and long-awaited upgrade. And then the second question was about unused Translink assets. I think you said at the start that you manage quite a large asset base, around 5 billion value. I found locally, and I'm sure other members have experienced this, that there are quite a lot of derelict and unused assets that could be put to better use for a range of projects, either within the public estate or potentially taken on by private or community voluntary interests. Disused bus stations, as an example, Saintfield, as an example, which I used to represent, or track beds as well, littered right across Northern Ireland, that are not maintained, that are grown over, but are still owned by yourselves. I think generally owned by the holding company that Translink has. No, you can maybe clarify,
I can clarify that.
But I would be keen to know your thoughts on how we can protect and enhance those track beds.
Yeah, so on the ticketing one, first of all, so we've rolled out contactless ticketing to Belfast Metro, to Derry, Londonderry, Foyle Metro as well, and we also have rolled out to a number of Ulster bus depots, Europa Station in Belfast, Bangor Station. So we're about 30 to 40% of the way there on Ulster Bus. Ulster Bus is a little bit more complex because of the mobility aspect of it and making sure we've good connectivity right across our network whenever people go to use contactless. But we hope to roll out Ulster Bus between now and the end of the year and complete Ulster Bus. NIR, you will see ticket vending machines going into the rail network at the minute. And again, we would hope to have the railway network completed by the end of this year as well. And that gives us further opportunities then for further integration of all of that, which would come after that, to start integrating that and go to an account-based ticketing system, similar to London, which is just tap on, tap off. And again, could be a big opportunity to encourage more people towards public transport. So that's where we are with ticketing at this point. In terms of as I mentioned earlier, Translink is a public corporation, it's a legal entity in its own right. We don't have any responsibilities for ferries or ferry ticketing, and I'm not even sure what the configuration requirements would be there. So that's not something we have any responsibility for. And whether extending the Translink ticketing system or a unique ticketing system for those, again, I wouldn't be sure of what the right solution would be there. Okay. Something that the department would have to address, but certainly something we would be happy to work with them on.
Of course, I mean, when you say that, I hear departments, the same department, of course, appreciate it's a private.
But whether it's a
it does fall within
that
department. So I'm just if the new ticketing system is best practice, then would it not make sense to provide it in other public transport settings, such as those two main ferry, Rathvillan and Strangford, for example? Appreciate where the fully private ferry contractors, that may not work.
So something we can pick up with the department. I think your other question was on unused assets. So in terms of track beds, other than Lisburn to Antrim, a lot of those other tracks aren't owned by Translink. They were sold off many years ago, so that they wouldn't come under Translink's ownership. There are very few assets, derelict bus stations, etc., like that, which haven't already been sold off. Saintfield is an exception to that, and the main reason for that is that we are just working with the department to get a bus lay-by there. And once we've secured the approval for that bus lay-by, then our intention would be to dispose of the rest of that land.
Do you know why that particular one has taken quite so long? Because it was one of the first cases brought to me as a councillor when I was first elected back in 2014. So that was part of the talk there. So there seems to be quite a long time to move those or dispose of those unused assets. Any idea why that does take so long?
That particular one has had some complexities with it, which I won't get into a lot of detail here on, but we can talk about that afterwards. But we are keen to try and move it on now. and everywhere else where we've had those issues, they have already been disposed of.
Got reeled in there with the 2 questions, but you definitely got more there. Danny?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chris and Graham, for today. You'll be glad to know that I never do final questions. And all my questions, to be fair, worded in different ways, but your answers have already covered it, so I won't try and re-ask them. I will just make one point, because this came to me as the school came in there, just around the Grand Central Station and possible disruption, is just making sure one of those stakeholders and information goes through the schools, because that's, I'm just saying, after Easter, with exam time, and just then we changes and stresses are already there. And I was very lucky. I'm West Belfast. We have the glider, and it's changed so much of the behaviours of especially young people travelling, and the kind of activity that they have is fantastic. So yeah, just making sure that they have that information.
We've met with the local schools and also with the hospitals in the area as well, and all of that too. So we have met with those stakeholders. Yeah.
Just that wee point out. I knew you would have anyway, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Danny. A very valid point, and welcome. Hello to the school that has joined us, to the committee. Mark?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the fellas for coming along. It's another bleak presentation. Sadly, we're used to it at this stage. We're only a couple of months into this mandate, but we certainly appreciate and welcome the ambition of Translink, and it doesn't sound that far away from the ambition and direction of travel that the department state, but that ambition needs to be matched with investment. And sadly, I panic when I hear you saying that you're not even assured of the capital allocation that you were depending on next year. So that is where you have a lot on your plate, a lot on your radar in terms of prioritisation. For me, I think the first thing that needs sorted is the pay dispute. I appreciate there are negotiations ongoing, but you're only as good as your workforce, and you have a very good workforce, but currently they're not a very happy workforce, and that's entirely understandable. Well, I appreciate the confidentiality of the negotiations in terms of the nature of those. Are you, Translink, as a company, being supported appropriately or adequately by the department, do you feel, or if they just says to you, there you've got your gettings, now you sort it out?
Well, look, we work closely with the department on all issues, and they're very aware of this issue. The Minister's very aware of it as well. We also have to strive to make sure that public transport remains affordable as well, and that's in everyone's interests too. So it's about trying to have those discussions in a way which is addresses any staff concerns, but also make sure public transport is affordable and make sure we have the investment for the future as well. But we do work closely with the department on those discussions.
Yeah, because it's the disruption of a day of action lasts a day, but the damage lasts a lot longer. And I don't mean the wider economic damage, just the damage, the reputation of public transport, and the perception of it as reliable, which is what you strive to be and what we need it to be. I was wondering, are you doing much work, or have you been involved with the councils who have been drawing up their local development plans in terms of identifying opportunities for increased bus infrastructure, bus lanes? I'd asked the department about this. It might have been last week, it might have been the week before, but it's the lack of bus lanes outside of Belfast.
Yeah. So, if we answer the question specifically about outside of Belfast, yes. Talk about the northwest. We work very closely with the council there, and we've suggested a number of areas in terms of their new scheme that they're planning of where bus priority could be better used. And we were really keen to get some bus priority into Derry, Londonderry, for example. I think there's some good opportunities there. And we've just invested in a new zero emission fleet there as well. Encouraging more people to use public transport would be very helpful. The council have set up a group to look at how to encourage more people to use public transport, and we're very active with them on that as well. So yeah, we have been working on that. We engage with all of the councils on their local development plans as well. But sadly, even in Belfast, the last bus lane really that went into Belfast was when Glider was implemented in 2018. We haven't been growing our ambition on bus priority since that. There's been a big gap, and we hope with the executive back now we can start to address that in all of our urban areas.
Where you have had investment, and I referred to the glider in his own constituency, and even the electrification of the bus fleet up with us, and the move to contactless ticketing, for example, has that seen an increase in passenger numbers when you're maybe making it easier and more attractive for passengers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, glider, we saw about a 40% modal shift from we implemented glider phase 1, and we need to see more of that in areas right across Northern Ireland. Contactless ticketing, the uptake in contactless has been very significant as we've implemented it, and investments, anywhere where we do investment really, we get a big benefit straight away, and it's about doing more of that and joining the network up so that we can get those benefits. And we talked earlier about some of the benefits. It's not just the benefits of modal shift, that's very important, but we know that our hospitals, for example, have real challenges with car parking and people getting accessibility to their hospital appointments. I mean, public transport can play a major role in that, and there's more we can do in that area. There's definitely more we can do, particularly in rural areas as well. We know that, we talk about the regional imbalance in the economy and everything else. Well, if investors are going to come into some of those areas, they need good infrastructure, they need good access in terms of public transport. So there's lots of benefits across Northern Ireland to putting the investment in. And although the investment is significant in millions of pounds relative to the investment going in some other areas, it's relatively small, but yet the benefits could be cross government.
So the bang for buck in terms of modal shift and investment of public transport is unmatched. And another issue I've been raising of late is the Climate Act that puts an obligation on the department to spend 10% of its transport budget on active travel. Mm-hmm. I am a big advocate of active travel, but I'm also a realist, and we're not going to manage to spend 10% of the transport budget, no matter how small the transport budget is, and it's too small for us now, on active travel, whereas you get a much bigger bang for buck if that definition of active travel maybe could be extended to include public transport in some way. I don't know if that's something that you should.
Yeah, I think there are parts of active travel which we can connect to. For example, a park and ride, which includes active travel, could be one of those areas where we could address that. But the government in the Republic of Ireland, the Minister in the Republic of Ireland has said that his ratio of spend on public transport versus roads is 2 to 1. That's the ratio that he's going to have. So there could be opportunities there in terms of policy shifts towards public transport if we start addressing the balance of funding. In fact, the Northern Ireland Audit Office report back in 2015 was recommending that as well, and we just still haven't done it. So I think there are opportunities to do that, Mark, and there are opportunities for us to work closely with active travel to make sure that we join that up, and that sustainable travel really is active travel and public transport working together.
And finally, first final question and last, I'd referred to and you had mentioned the uncertainty around your capital allocation next year. Now then, in terms of projects identified for commencement next year, I'm thinking particularly of phase 3, Derry Coleraine rail line. There's no assurance then that will happen?
Until we have a plan, and it's in our plan that I've shown you today to start the work on that, but it will be subject to the capital budget.
Okay, thank you. There's just 2 areas I just want to pick up on. One of them you may be aware of is the Transport Hub Alternatives Group, and in relation to the Boyne Bridge, they have put forward an option of a safe pedestrian crossing and a redesign of the Boyne Bridge rather than a demolishment of it. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, look, we had lots of consultation on this back in 2015 onwards, basically, and we submitted our plans on the basis of what we consider to be the best option for passengers, for the regeneration of the area, and for the protection of the heritage in the area as well. The original saltwater bridge is actually buried well down beneath the ground. We've done boreholes there and checked where the bridge is. We've agreed with the heritage teams that that will remain in situ. We won't disturb that in any way. And as we build a new saltwater square, we'll refer to that heritage so that people can still come and see where the old bridge was and refer to it in heritage terms. In reality, it's just from an engineering point of view, it's impossible to retain the bridge, and from a pedestrian accessibility point of view as well, it wouldn't meet current accessibility standards. And we covered all of this very extensively in our consultation as part of our planning, and the planning has been awarded on the basis that we reconstruct that whole area from a public realm perspective, and we're well advanced now, obviously, on that work.
Thank you. Also, in your evidence session there, you mentioned that you've had to utilise capital funding for maintenance, which would come from obviously your resource funding, as you've said. Does this occur annually?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And do you need to seek approval from the department when reclassifying the capital to resource?
Yeah, we do. We go through an economic appraisal, and we go through the normal process where we identify the work that needs done to a particular asset, and we go through an economic appraisal the way you do for any capital project. And again, that in itself is a cumbersome way to do maintenance, having to wait every year to get your capital allocated, to go through an economic appraisal and a capital appraisal to do that, which is resource funding, which typically is done for maintenance on a multi-annual basis, where you would agree this is the amount of funding you need to maintain the network, and that would be agreed over a multi-year, and it allows you then to more efficiently engage with your supply chain, whereas we're doing it in a stop-start sort of way through capital funding.
For how long have you had to shift?
For as long as I've been in Translink, Chair. So 10 years.
10 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I just want to...
Just a wee point.
Yeah, Cathal, go on
Because it's an
ahead.
important point, and Chris had mentioned, and also Mark had picked up on the council stuff. I mean, and I'm not faulting anybody, but there seems to be still, we know this ourselves working up here, this mentality of working on your own. You mentioned Sydenham there, now I know it was a private company and they dealt with it, but you have a situation now where we're looking at spending public money to connect that up again. This silo mentality has to stop. So we need to have a proper conversation as a committee how we'll link the department with whatever connectors and link up the council if we're serious about addressing all these issues. There's no point in bringing in new policies, new legislation on each partner's not, they're in a different pathway to all the rest of us, because that's the way it seems. It's just when you raised that specific point, and it's a conversation we'll have to keep on our radar, to be honest with you. It just doesn't seem to be working out right, because we're going to might have to spend public money and justify public spend to address a private company issue, so.
Certainly, and I mean, whenever you're talking about connecting communities, dealing with regional imbalance, all of those issues, it is a cross-departmental type element, to that. So, but lastly, I just want to say a big thank you, because you do have excellent staff, and Graham in particular, I do want to pay tribute to Graham and his team, because ourselves as MLAs, as public representatives, whenever we do contact yourselves, you are very good in helping us with the queries that we do have. So I just want to put that on record today and to say thank you, and we do appreciate the work that does go on in what is a challenging budgetary position. So thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. We look forward to working with you again, and indeed our trip as well out to the new hub. It'll be exciting to see that. So thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that feedback as well.
Thank
pass
you.
it on.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair, for your
you.
kind words.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers now.
Okay, thank you, members. We are bang on time, which is a record for this committee so far. So let's keep going in a similar vein, hopefully.
Like Translink.
I didn't say that.
Oh, well done, Mark. That's it. That's properly recorded now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Patrick, you had raised just in relation to the ferry and the tickets, so maybe that's something that we can follow up with the department on, if that's okay. If you're happy with that, we'll follow that up as well. members, you agreed just to receive a response from Translink on any issues that weren't raised or not covered. Cathal, do you want to come in?
There were some interesting questions. Obviously, we didn't get round to in the
Yeah.
briefing, so we'll send them on for answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was another good session though,
yeah.
in terms of what we got back there. So happy with that. We'll now maybe move on if that's okay. So we have the item 8, which is the overview of DFI's water and departmental delivery, finance and budget briefing. At page 113 is the clerk's memo, DFI's financial position and budget. At page 115 is DFI's finance and budget written evidence. And at page 121 is the DFI PowerPoint presentation. And I just want to ask members that we're content for the evidence to be recorded by Hansard today. Welcome again to the committee. We have Declan McGowan.
Yoan, yes, sir.
Yeah. Deputy Secretary, Water and Departmental Delivery Group, Department for Infrastructure, with Julie Thompson, Deputy Secretary, Climate Planning and Public Transport Group, Department for Infrastructure. I think joining virtually, we have Colin Woods, yeah, and he is the Deputy Secretary, Transport and Roads Asset Management Group, Department for Infrastructure. And we've Susan Anderson, Director of Finance, Department for Infrastructure. I just want to check before we go on. Colin, can you hear us? We can see you, Colin, but can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, brilliant. Super. Love it when technology works.
You made money here. You should ask that question first.
So obviously we do have all the evidence that you have provided to us in writing. We do have obviously the PowerPoint presentation. So I would ask just if you can to keep it as brief as you can, because members will want to come and ask questions. So I'll let you go first, and then as normal I'll open it up to members for questions. But thank you for coming to the committee today again.
Well, look, thank you, Chair, and I will keep my comments brief then, because Susan has the presentation lined up, so I'll just pass to her without further ado, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, so thank you, and Chair, we will keep this short. I'll just run through at a very high level then the presentation, given that members will have read it already. Okay, so if we look then at, sorry, I think I've gone too far. The IT is now not working for me. Hopefully that's it now.
Too soon.
So if we look then at our opening budget for this current financial year, for 23-24, we received an opening budget allocation of 523.4 million. However, whenever we compare that to the previous year's budget, 22-23, that actually equates to a 14% cut when compared on a like-for-like basis. And the reason for that is that in the previous year, Translink was required to use reserves rather than receiving budget allocation. So that's where we started in terms of this current financial year. If we look at our allocations, then around 52% of our opening budget goes out to our arm's length bodies, with the largest element, 28%, going out to NI Water, which was 145 million. However, what I would say is whenever we look at this budget position and set it against our requirements for this current year, we had a shortfall of 167.5 million. This therefore required us to take a number of very difficult decisions in the absence of ministers. Those were taken by the then Permanent Secretary. So we took a number of decisions around moratorium on recruitment, around how we would manage any pay awards by not bringing in additional staff. We also then took a decision around continuing with the limited service on roads maintenance and indeed flood management as well. This then meant that our funding gap reduced to 112 million. Knowing that we had further to go in terms of trying to bridge that gap, and in line with our quality impact assessment, we took a number of further decisions, and that was around stopping our general admin expenditure, as well as stopping road safety advertising, and that was for the second consecutive year as well. We still weren't there in terms of trying to balance the opening budget. So there were a number of further decisions that we talked about before at the committee, just around decisions that couldn't be taken. They couldn't be taken because they weren't in the public interest to do so. And those focused in and around stopping wastewater treatment, reducing our limited service even further to emergency only, turning off street lighting, stopping winter service, etc. So no gridding, and those decisions are outlined therefore on the slides. And those were decisions that could not be taken because they wouldn't be in the public interest. What we were able to deliver, though, in terms of resource, we were able to deliver flood risk management of 2.3 million. We were able to fund NI Water to the about 172 million around now. Waterways Ireland again has received funding, and we're able to fund the road drainage charge that's within the water group. In terms of transport, we have maintained then our limited service and essential maintenance. We've maintained street lighting, we've kept the street lights on, and we have delivered then the winter service programme as well. In terms of transport, you'll have heard from Translink already. Translink has been funded 153 million with community transport and ferries as well. Those are the key elements drawn out there. Our total budget at the moment, as we stand, is 615 million. So the balance is around staffing costs as well. And we talked previously as well about the additional allocation from the executive, and that's how we've been able to balance the budget. And as we sit today, we are expecting to land the budget within the allocation that we have. Moving on to capital then, again, the majority would go out to our ALBs. 76% of our total capital budget goes out to our ALBs, of which 39% has gone to NI Water and 34% has gone to Translink as well. As we normally do at the start of each year, we do introduce an element of overplanning. So we have our budget allocation and we overplan on top of that. And why we do that is because two key reasons. Firstly, schemes can slip, and that would be quite normal, particularly in some of our big schemes, they will slip. And alongside that, quite often we bid for funding and monitoring rounds and are successful, either through additional funding becoming available, through Barnett consequentials, or indeed through reduced requirements from other departments. However, we got to a position throughout this year where we hadn't received any additional funding, so we had to take immediate action then to stop and pause a number of schemes. And where that was felt most was within Translink and the department, with both having to take cuts in the capital budget in year, but NI Water then was asked to continue just to plan on its opening 321 budget allocation that it has received. So again, just some of the examples that we have funded this year. I'll not read them out, just go through them all. But again, we've received an additional allocation of 16 million from the executive, and we know that's gone to structural maintenance, and then NI Water and Translink as well. And again, as we sit today, with just 2 weeks to go before year end, we are expecting to land the capital budget on budget as well. So that's in terms of this current financial year. Moving on then to next year, and committee will receive the details of the bids that we have submitted. So again, our requirement for this year is 676 million. So that's to continue to deliver the services we're continuing to provide, plus increasing in terms of climate change, an additional amount in there for climate change, as well as ramping up the level of service, moving from limited, slowly increasing up then to a standard level of service as well. However, we would strip those elements out, so the increasing bit out, we would still need around 650 million to deliver the same level of service that we're delivering this year. So that includes the impact of pay and inflation, but not anything new over and above that as well. Finally then, in terms of capital, we have submitted capital bids of 1.12 billion. And again, the majority of that relates to our ALBs. And again, it's drawn out there in terms of the amounts that we have submitted bids for. Maybe what's not drawn out there is it does include 85 million for flagship projects, which includes the Belfast Transport Hub, which I'm sure you've heard about, as well as the A5, again with the Shared Island funding coming in alongside that as well, and the A6 in terms of flagship projects, and then city deals as well. So that concludes the short presentation. I'm so happy to take any questions.
Super, thank you very much, and thanks for the presentation. Okay, I'm a bit confused. The department states that the resource requirements for 2024-2025 financial year are 676.6 million. This compares to the previous year, which is 690.9 million. So how are we less whenever I'm hearing all the time that we need more? So why have the anticipated resource requirements reduced from the previous year?
Maybe I'll start and Susan can come in. And, one example of, for example, this time last year, Northern Ireland Water's resource ask was around 215 million. This year they're coming in around about 170 million. So there's a reduction from that perspective, and that's largely due to energy cost predictions, etc. So that has helped bring it down. But
yeah, I mean that primarily is the key thing. The NI water movement, from terms of what we needed at the start of this year, was 215, which has come down now to 172, and that's largely due to energy and chemicals costs. And again, then we're forecasting for next year that will be the lower side compared with the higher side at the start of this year.
So is that the only place where these savings have been realised then across?
Reduced requirement rather than a saving, yeah.
So for it's mainly energy then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, energy savings, what they expect the energy cost to be this time last year versus this year is lower, yeah.
So then detailed in each of the charts that we have seen, the majority of money from the department's budget, I suppose, in layman terms, is Northern Ireland Water and Translink in terms of the pie charts. So how detailed is the information from Northern Ireland Water and Translink when setting out their requirements with the department? Can you provide any details to the committee on that?
So, for example, in the case of Northern Ireland Water, they would develop an operating plan each year, so that would set out their resource requirements and their capital requirements broken down, by budget heads with what they need to spend their money on. The same would be the case for Translink. So we would have that level of detail underneath that to work with and to see where their needs are. For example, in Northern Ireland Water, the key aspect of their request would be around salaries and energy costs. So that's where their larger sum is. Translink's probably something similar with fuel and staffing.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of them, when the budgets get allocated, then obviously that goes out as a set amount, and then they will be asked to live within that budget allocation, and then potentially have to spend around a bit in order to do that. And the only things really that I suppose get ring fenced are like the flagship projects that they have to then spend in that particular area. So they'll set out a plan, but ultimately that plan will have to be adjusted whenever they get their actual budget confirmed to them.
Sounds like it's robustly sort of challenged. Would that be the case?
It is. I mean, we have a finite budget, and therefore when people submit what they need, we need to go through it. And that's the same is true within the department as well, that we have to go through that line by line really to make sure and interrogate those figures. So we would do that with our ALBs, but we'd also do that with our own divisions in the department.
So we've seen some allocation in terms of road funding, and that has to be spent by the end of the financial year, and that will sometimes happen quite a bit. So there's pressure to spend in relation to the likes of DFI roads. Do you think that's a good way to spend public money when there's pressure to spend it? Does it get allocated in the most appropriate way on the ground?
Of course, we would like more certainty at the start of the year so we could plan out our work streams accordingly. But the world we live in at the moment is if money becomes available in year and we need it and we've pressing needs, and we do have pressing needs, then we will try and divert money to that and address pieces of work that couldn't originally be planned in because we didn't have the budget for it, but we're on standby in case money was needed. So it would be a good use. It will be funding things that need to be done, but ideally we would like to have the full quantum at the outset to allow us to plan better, but that's the vagaries of public funding at the moment.
And in terms of obviously looking at projects where it's a invest to save type scenario, where has the department looked, at prioritising those invest to save projects and measures?
I mean, we've a heavy focus on addressing what are our essential pieces of work that need to be done, but of course we need to be looking at where there are opportunities for invest to save. So we are, for example, developing a digital strategy, which I'm sure the committee will hear from in months ahead, where we will look to make better use of technology. We'll also look at, for example, Northern Ireland Water have plans around wind farm technology, etc. So we're working closely with them to see how far we can take that. So priority is to fund the essentials at this stage, but also to have one eye to where we can make savings and reinvest that money accordingly.
Okay, and then just lastly for myself at this moment in time, decisions not within the power of the department. So, for example, street lighting, emergency response only to road maintenance and flood risk, turning off street lighting, all of that. That's obviously a detrimental impact to people on the ground. We're all those people on the ground. And also the likes of road gritting and things like that. Are those options still on the table as cost saving, revenue raising type ideas that are on the table from a Department of Infrastructure point of view in terms of finance?
Sure, when you say on the table, looking into next year, yeah. Looking into next year, we're still looking. We don't have a budget at the moment, as you know, so we're just trying to set out what our key priorities are. When we're clear on those, we'll be able to then carve it up. We would imagine, subject to the Minister's view, that the priority will be on the essential services, such as those listed there. So I would hope that those would be things that would still be considered to be funded going forward. But until we have a budget, until we're starting to make those decisions, we're not in that space. But at this stage, we're not making any proposition to reduce those at this stage. It's just that these are the pressures that we had this year that we thought we couldn't take the decisions on. But next year, I think the focus will be very much on delivering the essential services.
And revenue raising, is that being looked at?
Yeah, it's been looked at. I mean, Susan can set out some of the detail. We've looked at fare increase and such like over the last 12 months and prior to that as well. And we will look going forward what other opportunities there are to raise revenue. It doesn't make a huge dent in the budget, any revenue raising, but where we can do it, of course, we do it. Susan,
Yeah, I think that's what we have factored in what we can already into sort of the budget scenario for next year. But other than the things that Declan's already mentioned, we don't have much more in terms of being able to generate more revenue.
Okay, I'll move to members. Deputy Chair.
Yep, thanks, Chair. Thanks, folks, so far for the questions. The Chair's covered a couple of those key points, particularly around, initially I was going to raise about invest to save. When you were in last time, I asked Colin about the impacts of not having a 3-year budget, and to me, it is hugely damaging, particularly in our capital works. To what degree is that impacting effectively that we're on the stand still in terms of our roads maintenance or our water infrastructure, where we're not able to put in enough each year to offset the impact year on year of the decline, if you see what I mean, and how is that factored into the assessment?
Well, I mean, ideally we would like longer term budgets. In years going by, you'll be aware of 3-year funding cycles, etc. Yes. Particularly because a lot of our work is capital based, therefore it would be better to plan ahead. When you can't do that, then you're only planning 1-year cycles, and therefore relationships with contractors, etc., is more challenging insofar as you're pausing some pieces of work which might ultimately lead to an increase in cost because pieces of work have been put further down the track. So that is a challenge for us, but it's the world we have to work within at the moment, so we can only plan with certainty on a 1-year basis, but ideally we would like to be able to plan much longer term.
Is there any piece of work that's been done to demonstrate from a financial point of view what savings and positive impact could be made if we were able to avail of a 3-year cycle going forward? I mean, you talked about contractors, for example. Are we getting the best bang for our buck in terms of that by 1 year? Clearly not, from what I'm teasing out there. And to what impact is that having on the tight finances that we have?
I think we get value for money for the services we do pay for, even in the 1-year cycle. We have looked at what we call the 10-year recovery plan for the department to look at just how we could cut our cloth over the next 10 years and how we could flatten the curve, so to speak, so that we could plan ahead. So we're doing a lot of that work. We've looked at what are our priority programs. We've looked at pieces of work that might need to be looked at in slower time insofar as they're a lesser priority. And so we are doing all of that work. So yes, there is a good degree of plan on that.
There's quite a number of capital projects that are either shovel ready or soon to be shovel ready, and we've had calls from across the country about new road schemes. They're not all going to be able to be funded, so what's the process currently for triaging those and assessing in what order they begin?
Maybe Colin want to take that one?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So the department took a decision last year on the prioritisation of major roads projects. And the Minister is due to review that in the coming weeks or months. As Declan has said already, part of the answer to that depends on how much budget we have. So we do have a range of projects that could be progressed further or could be paused depending on the budget availability and the Minister's priorities. So that's the process by which that would go. As you say, we have a lot of schemes underway. The total pipeline includes some 40 schemes, most of which are currently paused, and our ability to unpause any of those or to progress the ones that we're currently progressing to the next stage of their development really does depend both on the financial budget available and then the delivery capacity of the department.
Okay, thanks, Colin. The final aspect, Chair, just links into climate change, if I may, because it follows on from that. There's £40 million, I believe, in terms of bid for climate action plan. If we could just get a breakdown of that, and has the full financial impact assessment been done of the new climate change legislation that's in place? And is that figure going to be applied to each capital project, for example, in terms of offsetting the carbon impact? And how does that look in terms of the 2.4 billion that we hear of the cost of that? Because I'm assuming it would have the biggest impact on this department.
So I'll maybe make a start on that, and Colin, I'm sure, will come in and talk about his areas. In terms of the overall assessment, we're obviously working with DEAR and other departments about feeding into that climate action plan work. What we're bidding for here is the funding that would be helpful in 24-25 to take that agenda forward. And we have bid for 11 million under resource and 40 million under capital. And the two are inextricably linked. If we don't get the revenue money, if you like, we won't have the capacity to then do some of the capital work. Obviously, a lot of the, certainly from my own point of view, then working with Translink, and I think you've already obviously had conversations, which I haven't heard all of this morning with Chris, but they would want to do more about how they can decarbonise their fleets and indeed to increase modal shift there. So that would all help us, both within the department to create the capacity and also within bodies like Translink to move that agenda forward and to increase the decarbonisation. And a lot of the spend would allow them to do more purchasing of buses, for example, and allowing that agenda to move forward much more quickly than they would otherwise do. That's kind of where I would come from. Colin, is there anything you want to add from your side?
Just to echo the point around the delivery capacity and the need to generate that capacity as a reasonably early priority in making more substantial delivery of the rest of the stuff. So, you know, when you look at the tram area of those bids, you're talking about active travel delivery, you're talking about the Belfast Cycle Network, grants for greenways and so on. The absolutely critical part of that is the part of the resource bid that's down for staffing costs to create the teams and the people who are able to take these projects forward.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Cahill?
Thanks, Chair, and you're welcome back. It's not that long ago. Just, a couple of things, because last year, obviously, we had this limited service for essentials, you know, in terms of road maintenance, but also in terms of road safety, which was, as you see, it was a very difficult one for us last year with an increase in road deaths. And I'm just wondering, I mean, that was then against the offset of willing to overspend with trying to support community transport, which I agree. So my question to you is this: what was the overall impact in terms of last year on the expenditure and reductions, and then trying to cover some of the major things that we need to cover?
Impact insofar, I mean, we didn't get to deliver the full service this year that we would have hoped to have done. In fact, as you rightly say, some of it was limited, and indeed the same is true even on the Rivers side, where we had a limited service too. So it means you're really storing up issues to be addressed in future years. That's just common sense from this. So we have challenges that were there this time last year, some of which will continue there. Plus, there's the continual degradation of our assets insofar as if you're not maintaining them, then they start to deteriorate even more. So that challenge is an ongoing one, and certainly, you know, when I work closely with Northern Ireland Water, they would say that the longer you put off fixing things, the more challenging and more expensive it's going to be down the line. So I think that's been the key thing for us. We're basically pausing work that is probably going to be more expensive in the longer term. It's like fixing a car and putting things off. You know?
And when do we get a proper analysis of that? Because when you've seen the road deaths were up, sadly, not just blamed on the advertising, but overall we need to take a look at it. And in terms of, you're right, the long-term damage of essential road maintenance, that's going to impact it over a number of years. So, I mean, when will we see, or what analysis is coming out of that, or early indications?
Yeah, so I guess on the road safety, we did put on some adverts that people would be aware of, which were started around Christmas time, on both speeding and on careless driving, and you know, we will evaluate those schemes capital as we always do. We have then bid for 2 million to reinstate those programmes for next year. And would hope to be able to do so, given that we had 71 deaths last year. We'd obviously want that to be a lot lower if that's possible this year, and those campaigns help with that. But we are thinking obviously about other ways, as you know, and I think the day that I was here we talked as well about other methods of actually communicating with people and raising awareness about road safety, because a lot of it is behavioural.
And in terms of the community transport stuff, can we comment on that? I mean, I have to learn, and I know it's all about budgets and conversations, but like I said, we've done a limited operation on essential road maintenance, and then when it come to it, we secured enough funding for that, for the likes of community and others. So I mean, it's just what we learned from it, you know.
And I think obviously it was a very, very difficult time for community transport at the start of last year. You're absolutely right, and it took us well into the summer to actually confirm the position for them. To try and avoid that, we've given them their full funding for April and May, which will buy us that little bit of time in order to see what the final budget is. We've obviously bid for the full amount of funding to be able to be afforded, and as I think I said the last time, a lot of that community transport is actually supporting other departments like the Department of Health for appointments and day opportunities, and the, you know, if we weren't doing that through community transport, then those folk would not be able to access those services, and then it would be even worse. So we know it's an absolutely vital service. It's on our list as needing to be funded, and we've given them at the moment all the assurity we can, which is April and May, and then we hope to obviously confirm the position as soon as we possibly can when we get the budget, hopefully later in April.
And just now I see there on the capital bids is in relation to the local transport safety measures. Can you expand a wee bit on that? It's under the bridge strength and local transport safety measures.
So I'm happy to answer that if I may. So that's for improvements to the road network that are focused on safety. So for example, the planned project to upgrade the junction on McKinstry Road at the cuts at Derryachy, or other junction upgrades, traffic signalling improvements, pedestrian crossings, that kind of thing. So it ranges from some quite large projects like the one I referred to, which is a multi-million-pound project, right down to quite small projects of maybe £10,000-20,000 to upgrade particular crossing signals. So.
Okay.
So that's me, yeah, thank you.
Patrick?
Thank you, Chair, Declan. Good to see you again. Thank you very much, folks. Just looking over particularly the page of the presentation on the decisions taken by departmental senior officials to find efficiencies in year, and I'll say at the outset, I fully understand the difficult circumstances you guys were operating within, and that you obviously did not want to be in that situation, but just want to ask a couple of questions about that, if that's okay. So just to clarify that the figures that are on that slide are the cut, the saving that was made. So 3.7 million for flood management, for example, or 20 million for road maintenance service. I know 5% to community transport, and then on the later slide it says that there was 5.2 million spent on community transport. 0.1 million plus 5.2 million would suggest a slightly lower than 5% cut, but maybe that's just rounded up possibly. You maybe want to clarify that. Not sure, it's not overly relevant. We of course don't want any cuts to community transport. I do know, you know, the ones that you can compare between those two slides, if you take road maintenance for example, that was a cut of around 30%, roughly, the 20 million. If you look at flood management, and Declan's not going to be surprised that I'm raising this, that's around a 60% cut of what I assume the budget previously was for that service, in a year where we faced some of the worst flooding across Northern Ireland that we have ever seen before. So it does jump out to me as a bit of a perfect storm there, that we had this massive 60% cut to flood management services, and then we're hit with significant flooding. And really what I want to get at and ask yourselves is how you think that impacted the service on the ground in terms of response to those floods, and potentially preparation and prevention and warning services that could have been in place but may have been impinged as a result of those cuts. And I know there is obviously the review ongoing that will look at some of this stuff, Declan, but it just really jumped out to me there the huge cut proportionally to flood management services versus other areas?
So with a reduced budget last year, our focus very much was on priority areas where we thought there was a higher risk of flood, etc. So we would have concentrated our efforts on clearing out culverts and gullies, etc., and making sure that we were prepared in high risk areas. The rainfall we had last year, you've heard this 101 times, it was unprecedented, but it does culminate in a perfect storm insofar as rain will come down. But I don't think I could make the leap to say not having the full budget, the higher flood, because there were so many other factors that played into that last year, just about tidal issues and a number of other things. So what I would say is we did focus on the areas that were high risk, and we targeted those. We cleared out gullies and culverts, etc., where we needed to. The rainfall was such that it was so heavy in specific areas, and you know only too well, Patrick, and therefore we were addressing that. But of course, the future looks like we're going to be dealing with episodes like this going forward. There's no doubt in that in my mind, and that's why we're making higher bids into future years and concentrating and focus on that, to say that we need to be ready. That Jonathan would use the term living with flooding. I think that is where we're going to be in the future, insofar as we're going to have these episodes more and more, and therefore we need to plan for it. But I wouldn't say without any certainty that that there was a direct correlation with the reduced funding and the flood levels. I would say that the flood review will definitely flag issues that will be looked at going forward, but I think we did concentrate on the high priority essential areas at the start of the year, so our funding was targeted in that way.
Just quick supplementary, Chair.
Yeah.
I think it may well be fair to say that it didn't have an impact on flood levels, but particularly in terms of preparedness and emergency warning, for example. Do you think that if that additional budget had been in place and hadn't been cut back, there may have been additional funding for boots on the ground to, for example, give warnings out to residents and business owners in high-risk areas to ensure that they knew a little bit ahead of time based on your forecasting that was ongoing at that time but wasn't being communicated outwards, that might have helped?
Again, I mean, as right across the department, colleagues will say, if we had more staff, we could do more. But I don't think that the review will tell us what we need to know. But I don't think the fact that if we had more people to go out and directly communicate on a one-to-one or whatever basis would have necessarily been the answer. I think if we had better flood forecasting ability going forward, I think that will be a good answer, because what we currently have, we're able to take weather reports from the Met Office and prepare ourselves for those, where it says it's going to be heavy rainfall, etc. But flood forecasting allows us to get underneath that and say, there are other factors that will culminate and make this flood much worse. So we'll be able to target much more, and that's why we're bidding for flood forecasting tools going forward. So when we're in that space, I think we'll get slicker at that, and I think we'll get tighter. But I do think the team prepared well insofar as the budget has and what we knew by way of rainfall. It just was on precedented levels, but I suspect it'll be the norm going forward, unfortunately.
Thank you. Patrick did raise a question there about community transport and the funding there, which I think went unanswered. So do you want to just point to that?
I can pick that up. So it's a timing issue because we didn't know whether we could fund them or not in the early part of last year, as I was saying to Cahill. We did fund them on a sort of drip feed basis, which I know was very unsatisfactory. So it wasn't until the summer till we applied that 5% reduction, and that's why the miles, if you like, brings it to an overall lower number overall. Okay.
Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, folks, for your presentation again. Just a couple of quick ones, just in terms of the winter services. Obviously this year we're relatively fortunate, relatively mild winter in terms of temperatures, but obviously with a lot of rainfall and so on as well. But with the gritters probably getting yet less use than previous years in terms of overtime and so on, has there been any in-year savings in terms of the winter service with the winter that's just passed?
So I think you're right. It has been a relatively mild winter, but there's still been plenty of activity. So generally our gridding season will run right the way through to the end of March. And at that point, we can look back and know exactly how much has been spent. I would have to write to you with the details of how much has been spent to date. I'm afraid I don't have that to hand. But as I say, we've had we've had plenty of activity, and some of the activity happens regardless of just how many routes that we grit in a winter. We've got duty supervisors and out of hours rotas making the assessments every night of whether or not gritting actions are needed. So I know we have incurred a sizable cost anyway, but I can write to you with the exact figure once the gritting season has completed, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, appreciate that, and hopefully we're through the worst of it, certainly, but I think it is positive, that I'm sure there will be grit in reserves, and I think over time I'm sure it's definitely been saved as well. And just a couple of ones on the third slide there, it's entitled Decisions Taken by Departmental Senior Officials. And there's 10 boxes there with obviously different topics and so on, and those were taken understandably without a minister in place. Now a minister is in place, are there any of those you see or as key priorities, for review?
I think it's fair to say, our focus very much will be on delivering the essential services going forward. So I would imagine, I'd be pretty certain that a number of these issues would be put forward as key pieces of work that need to be delivered next year, and a higher level of service if at all possible. So I think they'll be put forward more as priorities, and if we can afford them, we would certainly be addressing them.
Yeah, and I know road safety was mentioned there earlier as well, and cycle proficiency. Those are things certainly that constituents have been raising with me, and it would be good to see some action on it. Just finally, briefly, concessionary fares. Julie, I know I mentioned it 2 weeks ago, I think, when you were last in, and obviously the Minister was at the committee last week, and there's been a bit of discussion in the Chamber as well on it. Are we any closer to a decision on the future of this, do you feel?
I think we're still working with the Minister on it, and I think when you put it all down, we need the funding, so it is wrapped up in all these budget discussions, which we don't have the answer to. So it's bid for, we've within our list of bids, and we wait to see what actually is happening. But we're still working with the Minister on it as well.
Obviously, any changes will have an impact either way on your budget as well.
Well, yes, absolutely. But at the moment, we await the budget outcome, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks, folks. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Keith.
Okay, thanks all for coming along. I'm looking at this Annex A, the resource bid sheet. Couple of specific points I want to look at. See the priority down the left side, 1 to 20. Does that mean anything? Or is that just a number?
So that's in terms of the priority ranking. So that's really prioritising essential services and delivery of essential services, and then working our way down to higher priority first. And
so if you look at the bottom, I just lost it. So if you look at the bottom, does that mean that emergency response is less priority than road safety advertising?
Technically, that's what we're saying. Yeah, in terms of prioritisation, we've been asked to prioritise it by.
Right. So if the bid is less, obviously that's a resource bid of 156. If the bid comes in less, how do you equate that based on the priority ranking? Do you score that then, or what way do you work that out? So let's say you're down 10%.
So it would be a decision then with the Minister. So we would engage with the Minister. Minister would determine then, depending on what the budget outcome was in terms of his priorities, and then what would need to be funded thereafter. So,
and who comes up with this priority rating from 1 to 20? Who puts those in order of their priority?
So again, we put that to Minister from officials.
So that's his priority?
Yeah, at this point, yeah.
Okay. So a couple of just specifics, we'll stick in that resource one. Public liability, what is that? Is that for claims and potholes? Is that what that is?
That's for public liability claims from the public. Yep.
What was that last year in figure wise? If that's 1.5 million, wasn't it more?
So that's on top of the original baseline figure. Colin, do you have the exact figure there? I think it's.
I do. I'm just looking for it here. So in 23-24, we're expecting to spend 7.8 million on public liability claims.
So why then are you only asking for, is that
that's
additional?
On top of.
Okay.
Yeah, so 7.8 plus another 1.5 on top of that.
Fair enough. What's that one? So if you look then at priority 9, road maintenance, what's transition to standard mean? Increase from limited? What does that mean? Maybe that's some technical term, but I just don't know my answer, so I'm going to ask the question.
Colin can pick it up,
Yeah, so that's the difference between our current limited service standard. So the committee's already heard around the depth of potholes that we intervene in and the intervention threshold. That's the amount of money that we estimate it would take to raise us from limited service to a standard road maintenance service, where we could go back, if you like, to the standards that we used to be able to deliver when we had a greater budget available for that activity. So we estimate that's the difference that it would take.
Another 10 million to go to standard. Is that what you're saying, Colin? Yeah.
it's 20 million from memory. So somewhere around 55 million is what we would need to deliver a standard essential maintenance service. That's the resource component.
What does the 10? What does the 10 mean here?
So the 10 is ramping up, so we recognise we
it's
can't
ramping
go immediately from limited to standard, so we're saying we would need to slowly increase that during the year, and we reckon about 10 million is what we would need to do that ramping up in year.
And then the planet. Sorry, Colin.
So I was just going to say part of that, as Susan says, is around our internal capacity and the time it might take us to fill vacancies in order to actually put through that amount of activity with our internal contractor and with our external contractor base.
And then planning capacity up. I'm not seeing. I've seen the minute ago, but I've lost it. It increased as well. What's the theory behind that?
So again, that's about saying we need to invest in our planning system, whether it's within the central planning group or within roads and rivers statutory consultees, in order to improve their performance. So that 1.5 million has allowed that to happen and to bring more staff in to improve that service.
Okay, and then final one is on the capital. Final question for me. the final question. DVA capital is 2.2. What's that for?
It's predominantly for ICT and digitisation. So you know that they run an awful lot of schemes and a lot of digital processing going on there. So that's to allow them to, and it would be an ongoing investment that you need to do in terms of keeping your capital and your ICT schemes up to date. So.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Keith. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Just a wee quick follow-on, and thank you for coming in to what Keith was asking. Would it be possible for us to be furnished with those baseline figures?
Before we see the additional?
So we know what percentage of an increase is being looked for and whatever as well. I know you were saying, Julie, you caught a wee bit of the Translink session with us. I don't know if you had seen them or heard them saying that their capital requirements for next year was, I think, £325 million. And to see here the departmental bid is total Translink £241.5 million.
So if you go to the last slide, capital bids, Translink 321.5, and the difference will be, I think, the flagship scheme which has been bid for separately. So Translink's hub is separate up in flagship, and then you bring the 241 in. Okay.
Super duper, and I know that there's a breakdown on that, and I think there was 50 million of it was for rail infrastructure. Do you know when you're allocating that there, which or what particular work on what piece of rail infrastructure it's for?
I think Chris probably will have talked about it. You know, they have a range of schemes, obviously, that they want to take forward, and the investment that's needed in the rail asset. When we get the allocation, the flagship schemes and the likes of Citydale will be ring fenced, and after that it becomes an allocation out to the bodies. And we're looking obviously at rail about things like signalling and track renewal and bridges and fencing, you know, very equivalent, I suppose, to what you hear about on an ongoing basis to what Colin would talk to you about roads. And they have a range of schemes there that they're aiming to take forward. But the exact outworkings of that will then become part of when we know the final budget, a bit like what Declan's already described. We know the final budget, you can create a final plan.
Okay, thank you. And for Colin, maybe this one, just a wee explanation, I suppose, in terms of the flagship capital bids, the A5 one. Is that telling us that the department aren't bidding for any capital for A5, just taking the contribution from the Irish government?
So it'll be for the executive to manage exactly which pot money comes from. What we've done is we've set out the requirement for next year in our bids, and we've got a working assumption, if you like, that the shared island funding that was announced for the A5 will be available, but ultimately that's managed at an executive level.
Okay, but I know, and there's a wee bit to go before we hit the ground on the A5, and hopefully it is just a wee bit to go before we do so, but there are no strings attached to that shared island funding in terms of when the match funding from up north has to be spent.
I'm not aware of any conditions that have been specified on that. But that's something that we would expect to be working closely with colleagues in the south on, just in the aftermath of the announcement that was made.
Okay, no, thank you. That's me, Chair.
Thank you. Just a couple of points that I want to pick up on. Is 2024-2025, the capital bid is 1.12 billion for DFI, and then there's 470.4 million for NI Water. So what is the likely impact on the capital demands for NI Water in light of the utility regulator, because obviously they're going through the mid-term review of PC21?
So Northern Ireland Water's estimation was in around 580, 590 is what they originally felt they needed. As you know, we worked on the reasonable worst case scenario of 321. They had said that was going to present them with huge challenges, so I had said have a look at what you can do to deliver your essential service to make sure you keep everything going where we have safe drinking water and wastewater treatment works, etc. So they came back and said based on that they would need in around 470 million to deliver the essential services. So that's what that is. So the gap, so to speak, would be stuff above and beyond that they would more of the like to do. Not saying they're not urgent and critical, but these are the priorities that they wanted to fund through the 470 and needed to fund. So that's what that figure is about, and that's why we've put that forward as a bid. But as I say, our working assumption that we had given them was 321, so you can see there's a huge gap there. But 470 is more aligned to what they feel they could deliver an acceptable service and ensure that there's safe drinking water and wastewater treatment's being done properly, etc. So that's what that figure is for.
But I suppose that'll mean it's just literally the basics. We're not even looking at increasing anything else in terms of, other capital projects that are sitting on the list there.
Yeah,
that need done.
Yeah, the utility regulator in its determination has set out a work programme, so these works need to be done, and there's absolutely no disagreeing with that at all. It's just about how we prioritise them and timeline them going forward to the best of our ability so that we can make sure that the essential work is done. For example, within that there's 111 million on the Living with Water programme because the wastewater treatment works in Belfast are at such a capacity level now that they need addressed. So it's the exam question, so to speak, that I had said to Sarah at the time was think about what are the things that must be done, and then the things that we would like to do going forward, we will try and look at that in future years, because we simply don't have the money because we're trying to prioritise a finite budget. So that's what it's about. But to be reassured, if we were to get that 470 million, then you would have a service of wastewater treatment and drinking water. It's exactly as you would expect it to be. It just prevents us going into the more developmental type work going forward that Northern Ireland Water would like to get involved in, where it would unlock some development across Belfast and beyond. So that's what we'll lose out on, more of the economic stuff, which is in itself disappointing, but it's just we have to cut our cloth to make sure that we deliver the essential services.
I would probably go further than say it's disappointing. It's going to affect our economy massively in terms of that, and the construction industry going forward. It's critical in terms of Northern Ireland. But I'll leave it at that in terms of Northern Ireland Water for today. But during the evidence session with Translink, officials highlighted that capital funding is reclassified to allow for maintenance of assets. So what's your view in relation to that, the movement obviously of capital and resource? And
we have a go at that. So we give them a resource budget and we give them a capital budget, and those are fixed. I guess what it's then up to Translink to categorise them in using the right accounting classifications, for want of a better word, to get them into the right place. In terms of what Chris was saying is whether schemes that might otherwise be funded via that revenue funding are being funded via capital, but they cannot and they do not ask for reclassifications between the actual two categories that we give them. They're utilising their capital money in a particular way, and they're using their revenue money in a particular way, and there's nothing that I'm aware of that has moved between. So within Translink, if they are categorising something as capital, then they have to be able to defend that as capital. If they're categorising something as revenue, they have to be able to defend it as revenue.
That's not what we heard today in this committee.
but they don't ask us to move anything across, and they can't.
So I had asked them in the committee today whether they speak to the department in terms of that, and they said that they did, and that's been going on for the guts of 10 years.
They're not, sorry, the way you're phrasing the question, they're not moving money from revenue to capital, okay? We give them a revenue budget and we give them a capital budget. There's no movement going on. What they are presumably doing is looking at a particular scheme and saying, that's a particular scheme, I'm going to charge that to the capital budget. So they're not actually changing the budgets from one side to the other. They're just saying, rather than that project being charged to revenue, I'm charging it to capital. And that's what they're looking at. They're not moving money. It's maybe the way it's been phrased. Okay, so it's a particular project being charged to capital rather than a particular project being charged to revenue. Just as in roads, where Colin would have maintenance that goes on in capital and maintenance that goes on in revenue. It's exactly the same thing.
Well, even the fact that that's happening, does that point to or demonstrate there is a higher degree of underfunding in the capital side as it is moving? You know, that there is some movement there between.
I guess there's challenges in capital and revenue for both. You know, both are challenged, and we need to ensure that they're taking forward the projects as best as they possibly can, and doing particularly that essential work that we've talked about earlier that needs to happen. So they know the projects they need to take forward on the railway in particular, and they will make sure that those particularly happen. But I think, as resonates with the conversation elsewhere, they're doing a lot of work and a lot of really, really good schemes. Can they do more? Absolutely, they can do more, and they can do more both in capital and they can do more in revenue. But that's the reality of the budget situation that we're in.
And then just for clarity, how much capital has been reclassified? There's none?
No, we can't reclassify from research to capital. We can't do that, no.
Okay.
Sure.
Just to follow on that, what rules do you provide to Translink then? I know they can't reclassify it, but you know the way if roads can't move capital revenue, so are you giving them any rules to say, well, or is it effectively one pot then if there is no rules?
It's accounting standards.
yeah, but
the rules are not set by us; they're set by managing public money, and they're set by accounting standards.
Yeah, but what I mean is, if they're doing and defining someone as capital or defining as revenue, who comes up with the guidelines for them to define which is which?
It's accounting standards that are set globally for everybody, set by the accountancy bodies.
You said they could charge somebody in capital.
They have to be able to look at a project, define it as what it is, and put it into the right place, and talk to their auditors and all of that about that. Okay, that's for them to do.
Cropper on that?
No.
Okay, Cahill, you did
there. Just a final point, Chair, because in listening to all the questions and all the answers, we're going to have to come to a point where we need to talk to all our partners. And when I say this, I mean councils, because Patrick was asked there about the flooding. We're reacting to the flooding. So we set up a task force. Now we're waiting on a review of the flooding. We're allowing councils, in some cases, to build on floodplains. So it's all reactionary and stuff that we have to deal with. My main point, and I mentioned this earlier, Translink was in and they're talking about something. The new nothing was going on over in Sydenham when they decided to change around the airport. Now they're going to have to put something in to address transport connections there. So we need at some point, we know the autonomy of councils, but at some point we need to all sit down and have a conversation about where we really want to go, because you're in now talking about a budget and we're looking money to do certain things, but there's ways of saving things if we have the conversations and the right policies there to deal with. So moving forward, those are the conversations, allowing the autonomy of any of those groups, but we need to have a proper conversation of working together.
It's a very fair point, Cal, and to reassure you, those conversations do go on. Certainly from the Rivers team, they work very closely with council colleagues to make sure that they're alive to, for example, involved in the consultee role, where they're alive to challenges on parts of land in the future and where they might become floodplain, etc. So those conversations are live and they go on. So that does happen, but you can always develop and improve that.
Absolutely, because the PC21 that the church is often asking about, inflationary raises over the last 3 years, now that has gone from one point to the other. So they're sitting in presenting us, which is grand, but all I'm saying is sometimes we have to move it. We've only 3 years of this mandate, so we need to learn to have better conversations and better engagement across the board, besides just relying on the budgets and resourcing capital that the Chair mentioned. But just another conversation for nowadays, but for this committee to
Yeah.
have that conversation as well, you know.
And your point's very valid, because I mean, when we're talking about NI water, and I talked about the fact there of, PC21, the stuff that needs to be done in terms of our construction industry and further development here in Northern Ireland. I mean, the Department of Economy and how that marries up with governmental policies in terms of regional imbalance and all of those things like that. So, I mean, some of these points are crucial. But look, we appreciate you coming today, again to the committee, and for your time today. No doubt we'll see you again in the future.
Not every 3 weeks, by the way.
But thank you for today.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye. Okay, members, another good evidence session there. To be honest, I would probably like to go back and just clarify some of the things there in relation to Translink and movement of money between resource and capital, and check some of those points out with Department as well. I know we heard what they said there, but to be honest, some of it was as clear as mud to me. So I would just like to check.
Obviously, rules we just need a clarification.
Yeah, we
obviously
do.
Translink need a. I know you picked it up on Chair, but let's have a conversation.
We just need a wee bit of clarity just around some of that. And then obviously there were some issues that we maybe didn't get raised during that session as well. So are members content that we just seek some evidence just in relation to those points as well? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Chair,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking in relation to that, maybe the Public Finance Scrutiny Unit in RAISE might be able to shed some light on that for the committee.
Yeah, members content with that we check that out as well.
And Chair, just when now we're on the subject, just for clarity for everybody, because you mentioned economy there, planning is an issue which we're going to have a look at.
Yeah.
If we're going to continue to build in places that's going to, in 10 or 15 years' time, lead to flooding or on floodplains, then so we as a committee need to be looking at all of that in the round as we go forward with our programme of work that those people are having. Now, the difficulty I see is councils have their own autonomy in making their own decisions in some cases, but if we don't have the instruction from the department sometimes, then we're going to have those problems. We'll continue delays in plan, questions, JRs and everything else. So let's try and marry all up, because NIW has great plans to develop and grow and ambitious plans, but if there's not going to be the resource, with capital resource to develop, then that's a problem. So we need it.
We'll also have to remember as well, just with the legislation, because we do have the drainage and
All that stuff coming, yeah.
all that coming as well. So which will
Let's tie it into
be
all
in
the stuff we're
round.
doing and
We'll take a wee look when we come to our forward
okay.
work programme. But members content then to move on?
read.
Yeah. So we come to item agenda number 9, which is supporting legislation SL1s not subject to assembly proceedings. Advise members that there are 4 proposals for statutory rules that are not subject to assembly procedure and are not required to be laid. A list summarising the statutory rules is at page 131 of members' packs, and the rules at pages 133 to 137. So at page 131, members will be delighted to see some of these, I'm sure. So SL1 is the road races at Craigantlet Hill Climb, Order Northern Ireland 2024. The rule will permit the suspension of the right-of-way of traffic on Saturday the 4th of May 2024 from 7:30am to 7:30pm on lengths of Belmont Road and Ballymuscaw Road, Craigantlet, County Down, to allow the Ulster Automobile Club Limited, promoter of the Craigantlet Hill Climb 2024, to run the event. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule?
Agreed.
Agreed. At page 133 is SL1, the road races, Cookstown 100 motorcycle road race order Northern Ireland 2024. The rule will permit the suspension of the right of way of traffic between 7 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. on Friday the 26th of April 2024 and 7 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. on Saturday the 27th of April 2024 on lengths of roads as specified to allow the promoter, Cookstown and District Motorcycle Club Road Racing Limited to run the event. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? At page 135 SL1, the road races Northwest 200 order Northern Ireland 2024. The rule will permit the suspension of the right of way of traffic on the lengths of roads as specified to allow the promoter of the Northwest 200 for 2024 Coleraine and District Motor Club to run the event in line with the Road Races Amendment Act Northern Ireland 2014. The promoter has applied for 2 contingency days for use in exceptional circumstances. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule?
Agreed.
At page 137 is SL1, the road races Maiden City Stages Rally Order Northern Ireland 2024. The rule will permit the suspension of the right of way of traffic on Saturday 27th of April 2024 at certain times and on certain roads in counties Londonderry and Tyrone to allow the Maiden City Motor Club Limited, promoter of the Maiden City Stages Rally 2024, to run the event. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? And item 10 is the SR 2024-53, the Dungannon Road Portadown Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2024. At page 140 is the statutory rule. I advise members that the rule will abandon an area of 235 square metres of road at Dungannon Road Portadown adjacent to numbers 197 and 199 Dungannon Road at Birches Roundabout, Junction 12 of the M1 motorway. There have been no changes to the policy content since the proposal was considered by the committee at its meeting on the 6th of March 2024. The rule is subject to negative resolution. Are members content with the statutory rule? So I'll read the motion that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2024-53, the Dungannon Road Portadown Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2024, and subject to the ESR's report has no objection to the rule. So thank you, members. That brings us now to item 11, which is the Forward Work Programme. I draw members' attention to the draft Forward Work Programme. At page 148, you'll see it there. And I just want to ask members to note that the time for a committee strategic planning session has been included in the draft Forward Work Programme on the Wednesday the 17th of April. So this will entail a short committee meeting followed by a strategic planning session, obviously follows on from our conversations last week. So are members content with that bit? Yeah.
Sure. Can I just update members? Usually what I would do at this stage is contact members to see what members' individual priorities are so that we have information to start with to see if there's commonality there and how the committee goes forward. So then following a short meeting, the committee can then look at this informally and I noted there with the resource allocations the priorities for the department that might be a useful thing to also see. Are they also the priorities for the committee, or would the committee want to change those priorities in its work programme? So I will be emailing members later in the week, so I appreciate with the holidays and that a prompt reply if members can at all. Okay.
Yes, so please look out for that email and come back.
In the holiday thing. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. 10 days response. Okay, put 10 days notice.
Maybe not the 10 days, but do please come back to that email. That would be great. Thank you. So then members are content with that. So and then obviously today, following on from our briefings, the Forward Work Programme will be updated to reflect any of our decisions today. So I'm just seeking agreement to proceed with the evidence sessions and strategic planning as set out in the draft forward work programme. All content? Okay. So item 12 is any other business. There's just one item that I have, and that's at the final meeting of each session. It's normal practice for committees to delegate authority to the chairperson and deputy chairperson during periods of recess to submit views on the releasing or withholding of information in any non-routine or contentious freedom of information requests that are received. Should this occur, the committee would be advised of any such requests and the views expressed by the chairperson and or the deputy chairperson, along with the copy of the response issued by the FOI unit at the first meeting following the recess period. So I'm just seeking agreement. Hopefully we won't need to worry about this, but obviously we just need to have that in place should anything happen. So just seeking that agreement members are content to continue with this practice. Does any members have any other items of business that they want to raise?
Just to thank young Erin here, her first day here. She sat here for 2 hours and 15 minutes listening into the committee, so I hope she's learned something today.
Thank you, Erin. You're very welcome. Maybe someday you'll be sitting here chairing the meeting. You're very welcome to the committee. So, any other items, members? No, all content. So, members, obviously we have assembly recess during the Easter week. So, are members content that their papers for the committee meeting, which will take place on the 10th of April, that they'll be sent perhaps on the Monday the 8th of April, maybe before, but obviously staff will be on maybe on holidays. So, content with that? Yeah. Yes. Okay. So with that, the last item is the date, time and location of the next meeting, which is said there. The next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. On the 10th of April 2024 in room 29 Parliament Buildings. Thank you everybody for your cooperation today, and I'll now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.